Why does a painting you spent 20 hours painstakingly rendering get no likes, but a silly meme that took 5 sometimes pop off? How does social media even work? It feels so random. I've managed to get a couple of semi-viral art posts on various social media platforms, so I thought it'd be fun to try to analyze to figure out why that happened. But then I discovered something else that could prop up my art. But before we begin, I want to make sure that everyone remembers that the value of art is not determined by how much engagement it gets on social media. That is an entirely different thing, so please remember that. As artists, of course we want people to see our work though, and visibility is definitely helpful if you're a freelancer looking for clients. So, despite what I just said, there are good reasons to want eyes on your work. Also, remember that I'm only showing the ones that got a lot of likes. I've drawn plenty of things that got no traction at all, but that doesn't mean that they're failed or worse in some way. So, keeping that in mind, let's get started. Okay, so my very first social media post was on Reddit on July 11th, 2018. And it looked like this. As you can plainly see, that's not art. Before I seriously started drawing, I had dreams of becoming a bread influencer. Sourdough was my entire personality for months. And this was before I even made my Twitter or Instagram accounts. That's right, I'm a Redditor. And I was serious about it. I talked about dough hydration, open crumb, the works. Then I moved to an apartment without an oven, and there my bread influencer dreams died. So, then I had to find something to do besides get really sweaty at ranked Overwatch. While I was doing that, in one of the Overwatch Discord servers I was in, there was an art channel. I figured, hey, I used to draw when I was a kid. Let's start drawing again. And that's how it all started. I started pretty simply. I just posted sketches and drawings and Overwatch fan art in that channel. But I figured I could start posting outside of Discord as well, so I also started posting on art-related subreddits, such as r/character drawing. It makes perfect sense since I'm doing art, right? That specific subreddit was really popular with tabletop players, so I even managed to score a couple of D&D character commissions from there. But the thing about Reddit is that it's not like most other social media platforms, where you're posting to your personal feed. There are multiple feeds you can post to, for instance the r/D&D subreddit. As long as it's relevant, you can post to as many subreddits as you want. Subreddit rules change pretty frequently, but at the time, art of D&D characters was pretty popular, so in January of 2019, I just decided to post this commission I did of a D&D party. And I think this was the first ever post I did that popped off. It got 9.1 thousand upvotes and so many comments. I also started my Twitter and Instagram account in this time, and I was posting my art there too. Although, as expected, I got basically no engagement there. My accounts were gradually growing, mostly from when people found my posts on Reddit. But anyway, back then Reddit was actually really good for people that had no people following them. That's because every post starts on a level playing field. Its early performance with upvotes and downvotes determines how far up the front page that post is pushed. And there's also something else that's important to realize about Reddit. Unlike other platforms, the audience is all split up looking at different subreddits. So naturally that means the audience will be smaller, right? But one thing to realize is that the smaller audience is also much more focused. They're all going to be interested in the topic of the subreddits, which means that there's a higher chance they might be interested in related art. Anyway, one reason I think I got so much engagement on the D&D subreddit is that drawing subreddits are just relatively small. After all, drawing is kind of a niche hobby. The D&D subreddit was way bigger. But even then, not that many people play tabletop games, especially compared to regular video games. In early 2019, I was playing Apex Legends and quite enjoying it, so I figured I might as well do some fan art. So here is a drawing of Wraith. Okay, I know, it doesn't really look much like Wraith. Looks more like Speed of Sound Sonic from One Punch Man, but let's ignore that for now. And this one ended up getting 18,000 upvotes on the Apex Legends subreddit. Of course, I had to write a title starting with I drew, just to make sure that everyone looking at it knew that I was the original artist and not just stealing someone's art. And also, this ended up being my first Twitter post with over 100 likes, or even 200. And it was then that I learned the true power of fan art. And I couldn't stop. For a while, I just continued to do a whole bunch of Apex fan art. But gradually, it was getting fewer and fewer upvotes. I even tried drawing another Wraith to try to replicate the performance of the first one, but to no avail. What was going on? Was my art getting worse? Okay, at this point I can say obviously not, right? So what happened with the Apex Legends fan art? Of course, a lot of things affect engagement. I can only speculate with the benefit of hindsight, but I'll give it my best guess. Apex Legends was super hot when it first came out, and tons of people were jumping in and having fun with it. But as you can see, I was posting these over a period of months. When a hot new game first comes out, there's an initial spike of interest as everyone checks it out, but that will, of course, naturally cool off with time. With fewer people playing the game, fewer people were browsing the subreddits, and thus fewer people to like my art. I had another Apex banner of Watson that did pretty well later in June, but that coincided with the release of a new character and naturally renewed interest. But there's something more important than gamers being less interested in Apex, and that was I was losing interest in it. I only draw a banner of things I'm actually into, because on July 26th, 2019, another game had come out that had caught my attention. Fire Emblem Three Houses. Especially this guy, Felix Fraldarius. As you can clearly see from this footage, Fire Emblem is a turn-based strategy game. And I felt a drive to draw him in my soul, something way more important than how many likes I got. And so I did. But I quickly came to a realization. I sucked at drawing men. After this point, I had only been drawing cute anime girls. I actually could not draw anything else. But for the sake of my husbando, this had to change. And so I started studying anatomy. This also marked the first time I had started studying art fundamentals at all, which meant that I also started seeing all the flaws and mistakes in my work. To try to learn faster, I started focusing heavily on thin, precise line work. I was hoping that this would make it easier to hide mistakes or gaps in knowledge, because I really wanted to practice my draftsmanship before even worrying about color. But my work, especially with just thin lines, isn't exactly very appealing or impressive to most people, which shouldn't matter, but I still wanted that attention and validation from people online. So, because my work wasn't quite strong enough to stand on its own merits, I came up with a strategy, which was to draw multiple characters, and more importantly, character interactions. It seemed like a decent strategy for this specific genre. Fire Emblem Three Houses did show a limited number of character interactions, but it left me, and hopefully other fans, hungry for more. This strategy actually seemed to work pretty well. I got decent traction on the r/Fire Emblem subreddit, but also Fire Emblem fanart was the first time I actually managed to start getting interest on my work on a platform other than Reddit, Twitter. And this was important, because while Reddit was working really well for me as an artist with a small following, the strength was also a weakness. It meant that I was unable to build up an audience or personal brand of my own. And for the first time ever, I was finally getting likes that numbered in the thousands. Sometimes I would even break 10,000. And this was so encouraging that I even started to focus more on Twitter. When Pokémon Sword and Shield came out in November of 2019, I switched to drawing fanart of that game with a similar approach, drawing multiple characters in hopefully interesting scenarios. However, fanart wasn't the only thing I was drawing at this time, of course. Although as expected, whenever I posted my own original work, it got way less interest in comparison. That was to be expected. The people that had chosen to follow me at the time were members of a particular fandom. They weren't actually here for my art. And if I didn't have an existing IP to lean on, my art just wasn't interesting or captivating enough to stand on its own. I had to do something about it. And so I did. At the end of 2019, I started focusing more of my efforts on studying and spent less time doing fanart. And I also spent a little bit of time thinking about my art style. So this was what was going through my head at the time. As previously mentioned, I was primarily working on my draftsmanship and line work at the time. Whenever I did color, I kept it super simple, mostly because I don't like it and I didn't want to spend time on it. But I think that for Twitter in particular, colorful, eye-catching stuff tends to do better. At least that's my theory. If you think about how most people use Twitter, they're probably scrolling on a phone. Each image they scroll by is barely the size of a postage stamp. So I thought having bright, contrasty colors would help my art be more eye-catching. I was already heavily inspired by the work in Persona and Etrian Odyssey. And also there was an additional benefit to drawing in this style. Remember, I don't like coloring at all. Having all the shadows be solid black meant that I didn't have to do that part at all. I could just hide it or ignore it. That's a win for laziness. Anyway, I think this choice helped a little bit with these specific Zelda images I drew. Once again, of course, it was supported a lot by the interest in the upcoming Zelda game at the time, but I was surprised because I don't think I was drawing any sort of character interaction. It was just Zelda standing there, and it did surprisingly well. And luckily for me, also, the dark shadows hid all the mistakes I made. But besides these two Zelda images, I was mostly just focusing on my own work. I wasn't into any particular IP at this time, so I just stopped drawing fan art. I didn't want to force myself to do it just for visibility. So my engagement on all platforms just stopped. This is kind of a sad dilemma for a lot of artists. Naturally, we spend a lot of time on our work, so we want people to look at it, of course. It's natural. But in order to get the attention that we crave, we're sometimes forced to work on things that we don't really care about. I just wasn't willing to do that. I felt if I got my art good enough, then I wouldn't have to rely on fan art so much, but it just wasn't there yet. But then I discovered something else that could prop up my art. That was memes. Just stupid stuff, dumb ideas, absolutely silly nonsense. What if among us was anime girls? What if we took the trope of a girl running to school with bread in her mouth, but reversed it? And this worked really, really well, and that actually led to a realization. Art in general is a pretty niche hobby and profession. Most people you encounter aren't going to be artists. And in the same way, most people looking at your art online are also not going to be artists. If you're looking to get engagement from them, you're going to have to appeal to them. An average non-artist is not going to engage with an illustration simply because an artist spent a long time on it, nor will they marvel over intricate rendering or great art fundamentals if that's the only thing they can take away from it. What's more important, I think, is the overall idea. Good art fundamentals can help to sell that idea more strongly, but the concept is first and foremost what's important to non-artists. At least that's my theory. And following that theory worked super well for me for a really long time, even for absolutely ridiculous ideas, like this absurd Hatsune Miku well-endowed penguin. And by the way, if you know bird anatomy, this is actually the penguin's neck, but that's besides the point. Honestly, this is just more stupid than actually funny, but here's when I realized another hidden benefit of practicing your art fundamentals. I think there's actually some humor inherent in the idea that someone who spent tens of thousands of hours honing their craft and drawing something like this. I mean, well, now that I explained the joke, it's not funny anymore, but whatever. I also turned them into commissions, which people seemed to like. Although the downside was that I ended up having to actually do those commissions. Same applied for these hot dog commissions where I charged people extra for condiments. People really seemed to like what I was doing. But after that, I stopped. But why? These were working so well. But I think, like fan art, there comes a point where you want to draw something other than simply ridiculous jokes all the time. So it was then that I drew my currently unnamed original character for the very first time. And I know it looks like from these posts that he has a name, but I was later informed that it sounded like a bad word in another language, so it's gone now. Anyway, I promised that I actually designed an outfit for him, but it was super convenient to draw him without any kind of outfit to practice anatomy. How do people on social media like him? Well, compared to my other posts, basically not at all. And to fellow artists that like drawing their original characters, this probably doesn't come as any kind of surprise. Of course, I love my own character because I designed him myself. But to anyone else, it's just a mediocre drawing of a character they don't even know. So they're likely to just scroll on by. But somehow, this didn't matter to me. I was having so much fun drawing my own original content, and it wasn't really that important that no one else seemed to like it. Because the most important thing was that I liked my own work. Honestly, I still didn't really have any idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to design characters, so why don't we fix that? I decided to learn how. In January of 2021, I took my first ever online art class, which was an intro to character design. And well, there was quite a bit more homework than I expected. Since I had a full-time job, I wasn't really able to do much drawing besides my homework, so that ended up being the only thing I posted. But there was one character I designed for class that had unexpected results. This character right here. By the way, her name is Heather because of head plus feather. Get it? Anyway, while it didn't go viral, it did do better than every other homework I did. But why? An angelic warrior with wings for hair? That's not exactly very original. But I think people found her appealing all the same, so I decided to try drawing her more. But at the same time, I still had the same problem with my art because I was still very much learning. I still didn't have the ability to draw really impressive, detailed illustrations that can show off my designs properly. So what I chose to do instead was this. If one of my drawings don't stand out on their own, why don't I include 3 in one drawing instead? And somehow, this worked. This approach got a lot more engagement on Twitter than I ever could have expected. but of course it was relative. Yes, it didn't do as good as the memes or the fan art, but it's the first time that anyone ever showed interest in my own original work, so it was a really good feeling. But even though I got fewer likes, there was something different about all this. The engagement was lower, but I noticed that my follower count was suddenly going up much faster. Of course, I don't know for sure why that happened, but I can give it my best guess. When people interact with fan art, they are more interested in the IP that I'm drawing, not me as an artist. If I draw something jokey, that might get a laugh out of somebody, but I don't think they're thinking at all about the artist when they're scrolling by. But if it's my own original work that people are engaging with, then they're actually interested in me as an artist, and maybe that's why it led to that spike in followers. Like I said before, this is just my speculation. But it's very interesting to me that it went against conventional wisdom that you should draw fan art if you want to grow your social media presence. This trend also continued with homeworks I did for a much later class, although this time I added more world building and presented them as a sketchbook spread. These were fake, by the way, 100% digital. But they're still some of my favorite drawings to this day. Maybe I should do more of these. But cute human characters were not the only things I was designing at this time. I was also experimenting with creature design. Of course, initially I wasn't very good at it because I wasn't familiar with drawing animals at all. But here's where I realized that there's something else that people really love. Cute animals. I had a thing for skinks back then because I thought they were adorable, so I decided to make my own version of the blue-tailed skink. Except I made it extra squishy and soft to make it as cute as possible. Turns out cute animals is a very popular concept. But you know what's better than one concept? Two concepts! Sometimes just taking one idea and combining with something else can lead to something interesting. For example, blowhigh, which I probably mispronounced. A cute, popular plushie. What if we combine it with the strip game that was popular on Twitter at the time? And here's one of my favorite Pokemon, who is the bestest and cutest by the way, Clodsire. What if I combined it with food? Clodsire in a burger, Clodsire in a Nutella jar, and not just food, Clodsire with shoes, Sonic Clodsire, Clodsire with legs. I think simply being unexpected works pretty well sometimes. But there's also another reason that this Clod posting seemed to work well. Remember how I said fan art is pretty effective? One of my drawings with the most engagement I ever got was this image of Zelda, except I designed my own suit of armor for her. And this one completely blew my expectations out of the water. I received over 100,000 likes for the first time. Later on, I did something similar for Peach and Daisy as well. And I think it works because this type of fan art piggybacks off people's connections to existing media franchises while adding a spin that people haven't seen before. Yet again, it's more about having interesting ideas than trying to dazzle non-artists with fancy art skills that they don't even know the names of, at least I think. And I actually have some evidence for this. If there's one thing you should know about art classes is that there tends to be homework and it tends to be a lot of hard work. Yes, drawing is fun, but it isn't all fun. While I was grinding away, to relax a bit, sometimes I would draw some memes of things I was learning in class, like this Kirby shape design meme that was based on this. Now, I wouldn't say that the art is really stellar or anything, but other artists who had learned the same material could connect to it. I also made this Restober meme, riffing off the Inktober challenges that had people working super hard, but I prefer to rest if I need to. I think these worked because they were relatable to other artists, instead of being very impressive art. But these aren't even the most convincing posts I have. To find those, we'd have to take a detour to my study account, and take a look at this. Boxes, 22,000 likes. And not just once, or even twice. And yeah, they're decent boxes, I guess. Certainly not perfect, and certainly not impressive enough that anyone is really wowed by it. But then what about this? This is just straight lines. It was just something I did when I got a new tablet and I was trying to get used to the feeling of it. Again, I can't say for sure, but I think people just like the idea of people doing very simple, approachable exercises that anybody could try. But this whole entire thing, there's been something that I've been completely ignoring. Yeah, I've talked at length about my posts on Twitter, but it's not the only platform I posted on. What about Instagram? Unfortunately, for the most part, Instagram's algorithm proved completely impenetrable to me. On Twitter, I could basically sort of understand that the more I could get people to retweet my work, the more it would be seen. So the post that did well or didn't well made sense to me, sorta. On Instagram, I had no idea. I had a couple posts do really well, but then I couldn't understand why. Was it the hashtags I used? Something else? Where were people seeing my work? I think one reason I didn't understand it was because I don't actually scroll on Instagram very much, so I didn't have any sort of sense what worked and was popular on Instagram. And just because people like something on one platform didn't mean that they would like it on another. This is just a theory of mine, but every place has an art meta of sorts, and mine just wasn't Instagram's. But all of that changed when Reels arrived. At the time, TikTok was doing so well that every other platform scrambled to turn themselves into TikTok clones, and Instagram was no exception to this. My art really wasn't getting seen much to begin with, but it seemed to be getting worse and worse with the advent of Reels. So I figured I might as well try making one of my own. This is my first ever video. Yeah, that's not exactly great, I think. I tried a few more, but they were also kinda eh. And also, I was already running out of ideas for videos, so I started scrolling Reels for inspiration. And that's when I realized a lot of artists were using trending sounds to showcase their work. So why don't I try the same thing? There was a sound that worked like this.
Reduce your expectations to 0.
Basically, show off some of your prettiest art, and then boom, an unexpectedly low follower count. And I decided to do the same thing, but with a twist.
Reduce your expectations to 0.
Pretty dumb, right? But this remains my most successful post on Twitter and Instagram. 270,000 likes? Why? It's not even good. Why were people watching this? I saw my follower count increase by 20,000 in a single week. Wow, that worked so well. So I started to hunt for more trending sounds I could use. I had finally found a working strategy for Instagram, and this was it. Here's another one.
Here you go, Instagram. Here's a photo. As a reel. Put that in your algorithm.
And another one. I got to 100,000 followers on Instagram in a matter of months from almost nothing. But despite how successful it was, I couldn't continue with it. And it wasn't because I wanted to draw something else. It was because I realized that I wasn't really drawing much at all anymore. I spent so much time obsessively scrolling through Instagram Reels, looking for trends and editing my art into videos that I just didn't have time to draw anymore. I wasn't doing what I loved most, which was drawing. So even though it was incredible for visibility, I decided that most of all, I just wanted to draw more. I understand the irony of saying this specifically from a YouTube video. Listen, if you want to make YouTube videos and TikToks and Instagram Reels because you love editing videos, go for it. But remember, that's a whole other thing from drawing. I've not been able to draw as much as I want to anymore now that I have to focus more on my YouTube channel, but I still try to make time to draw as much as I can. Nowadays, some of my art gets likes and others not so much. But one thing I always make sure of is that I always had fun drawing it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll catch you next time. So bye-bye.